Hi, today we'll be talking about the international system and two schools of thought called realism and liberalism. Have you ever wondered why the United States does what it does or acts the way it does when it comes to foreign policy? As a political science major and an intern for the House of Representatives, this is one thing that we often discuss or are exposed to in many of the things that I've studied in class and many of the simulations that we've created to help us better understand how it would work hypothetically if we were put in these situations as a country. The international system that we currently live in is in anarchy, especially. There is no world government, and the reason why I hope you really take to heart the explanation of these two schools of thoughts or theories is to help you better understand not only why certain countries do what they do or certain cultures do what they do, but to help you better understand why you do what you do. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. So to begin, we'll be able to talk about the international system. So like I said before, the international system is not so much controlled by one entity or one state or one country. There's many international organizations, such as the United Nations, also known as the UN, or in Europe there's the European Union, which kind of consolidates power within one entity that helps benefit other countries, but it also has negative benefits for other countries if they're disobedient to certain means or terms that they've entered upon. One reason why this is so important is because if we understand that we really live in an international realm with anarchy, then it helps us better understand why certain countries do what they do. And with the recent, Brexit or, Britain leaving the EU, to help benefit, their economic growth and their own governance and their own sovereignty, it makes sense why or why not people would want to stay in such organizations, because there really is no, legitimate power in these organizations except that which these countries give to them. And so, that being said, we live in this state of anarchy where there is no supreme power, ruling over us as government goes. With the two schools of thought of liberalism and realism, I just want it to be clear that liberalism in this term is not, American liberalism. It's not, liberalism versus conservatism, where it's left or right, or it's Democrat or Republican. It has nothing to do with that. That's a whole nother topic onto why we got that name. But rather, liberalism is, the basic belief that humanity has, human nature has a good intent, and that they're there to promote good and to help cooperation maintain its, stability and increase equal powers for all groups. The reason why that's important is because you can see why certain countries at certain times have gone into democratized countries. One example is that of the United States. Between the 70s and the late 90s, we have gone into countries, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the United States, I'm just citing for reference, where we've gone into countries such as Afghanistan or Iraq, where we've gone in to try and help these countries, maintain or receive democracy because they've expressed their need and want for it. But the issue is, the issue is that their culture is so different from ours, not just religiously, but governance-wise, that when we go in to try and democratize something, even though it is to benefit them, we need to understand that they may not see it as good, even though we see it as good. And that's why the United States is sometimes considered the world police, even though there's a lot of things that the United States gets blamed for, and there's a lot of things that we have to kind of decide whether or not we're going to get involved in. And so with liberalism, hopefully it's not too confusing, but essentially it's promoting, what can best help, meeting in treaties and creating organizations or going into countries and teaching and helping them better understand how they can, reach self-sufficiency or, have a more stable government and not always end up in military coups or corruption. And so one way that can be explained is in the form of pie. And so hopefully none of you are hungry, but I'm going to draw this pie right here. And we're just going to use numbers. But there's 4 countries. And so each country has, relatively the same amount of power. And so in liberalism, as far as we understand, it's not about how to increase power between these two in comparison. Like country 3 doesn't want to have more power compared to country 4, but rather it wants to increase them equally or fairly equally, where it doesn't just increase power between the 2 or 3 or 4. It increases the power overarchingly, so it makes the pie bigger. So then that way, the pie will essentially be more balanced and better understanding in forms of, understanding culture and accepting culture and teaching certain, cultural differences and how to maintain human rights. Those are just some examples of how this happens internationally through organizations worldwide or through terms that countries have with other countries. Now, that was liberalism, and I'd like to turn over to realism. So realism, as I'm sure it's pretty obvious, it's a very realist approach, can be seen as negative, but it's really important to notice because you might be a realist yourself, whether that's in your dating life or, past job experiences. It kind of just makes you apprehensive as an individual to jump into new situations when you've had failure in the past. And likewise, it's the same for countries. When it comes to world power, it's not so much about cooperation is the main goal as, ultimate, relative power is. And so in the terms of realism, if we go back to this pie, let me just erase this. So countries A, B, and C, in realism, A is going to have more power, obviously. And they're going to be more concerned at maintaining this line of power over B and C than it is going to be, increasing it like with liberalism. And so they're going to do everything in their power to prevent, the pie to increase overall, as long as it keeps them in control mostly, or, comparatively to the other B and C. And so realism school of thought is focused mostly on how can I maintain power for our state or for our country. You can even draw this into parallel to domestic politics in the United States if you'd like, and you can see it along party lines with the majority and the minority in Congress right now. But that's just to help you better understand. But if we jump back to the international realm, realism is really there to help us understand, why countries, for instance, Russia or North Korea or even China, make certain decisions the way that they do. Why Russia would go invade Crimea and then annex it into their country when most of the people there are Russians, ethnically, and why that would make a difference in how, the United States or the United Nations goes to approach these situations. It makes sense why we would, why we would, prevent certain imports and exports coming into these countries rather than, going in and trying to control it ourselves with our own military. And so with realism, you have to be very careful excuse me, because you don't want to, overstep your bounds to look as like you're trying to take more of the power, but you want to maintain that equilibrium or that status quo, so to speak. And so I hope that helps you better understand. Just to round it up, liberalism is more about, cooperation and benefiting, human rights and, increasing self-sufficiency and just the livelihood of humans, while realism is more focused on maintaining a certain mindset within a state or country and maintaining the status quo of power. And so I hope you can see that not only in international realms, but also in how you make decisions, how sometimes you're more open to, benefit everyone, but sometimes you're also more open to just your self-interests. And if you better analyze that, you'll better understand why you make the choices you do. Thanks.